Hi, my name is Lee. I will be presenting the MLA Format video for the College of St. Rose Writing Center. We are located on the second floor of St. Joseph Hall. We can help with any aspect of the writing process from brainstorming all the way to final editing, and we help anyone, freshmen all the way up through professors. So this is the MLA Formatting Guide, and you can pause at any time if you need some extra time. What is MLA Format? MLA stands for Modern Language Association. It is the guidelines for how research papers should be put together and how sources should be acknowledged. MLA Format is used generally for English because in English the date of the publication is not quite so relevant as in other disciplines. So what is the purpose of MLA Format? It guides the proper use of sources and gives sources the appropriate credit. It enables readers to cross-reference your sources easily through the use of consistent formatting. And it gives you credibility as a writer. This is important so when a professor or someone reads your paper, if they're particularly interested in something, for example, an article that you cited, they could go into your Works Cited page and find the whole article, or find the references so that they could find it on their own. General format for MLA papers. Type double-spaced, 8.5 by 11 paper, 1-inch margins on all sides, no more, no less. Times New Roman, 12-point font. Title of longer works are in italics. Titles of shorter works are in quotation marks. The header on all the pages is in the upper right-hand corner, half an inch from the top, last name and page number. The way that this specifically the two titles were explained to me, for example, a book would be in italics, a chapter within that book is in quotation marks. And this is on page 2 of the handout. This is an example of a sample first page. This is the first page, so you need to have this header. Your name, professor's name, the course number, and the due date, not the day you're writing it. They might be the same, but it's the day it's due. You need to center the title, as we see here. And everything is double-spaced, no more, no less. Do not add extra spaces after paragraphs. And then in the header for the entire document, we have the student's last name and the page number for that page.
So I'm Amber and I'm also a tutor at the Writing Center. And this is just the academic integrity. If you want to go over the details of it, it's on the website. The link is right here. Basically, just be responsible for your own work. Do not plagiarize. There will be consequences. That's pretty much the gist of what it says. So using MLA to document sources. Okay, so why do we have to cite our sources? We need to credit the work others have done. Obviously, it's not fair to say that we did the work when we didn't do it. So what is plagiarism? So from the website, and of course you can always check in if you want any more details, plagiarism is defined as purchasing, copying, downloading, printing, or paraphrasing another's book, article, paper, speech, exam, portfolio, creative work, argument, or any other work and presenting it as one's own, either in whole or in part. If you don't cite correctly, sometimes you can plagiarize on accident, so just be sure to know exactly how to cite and when it's used. We'll go into detail a little bit on that. Okay, so incorporating portions of another's work without properly acknowledging and documenting is a sort of more simple way to define plagiarism. So what I like to say in terms of plagiarism is, if I'm not sure, I just cite anyway. It's better to be safe than sorry. I think maybe one time in my entire career have I had one professor come to me and say, you cited too much. That doesn't usually happen. So if you're ever unsure, just cite anyway. So consequences of plagiarism, again, this is pretty self-explanatory. You could get an F on the assignment, you could get an F on the whole course, you could have a documentation in your school records, you could be kicked out of school, So all of these are bad things. So just be sure to cite when you are using another person's work. Okay, so cite your sources when you quote, paraphrase, summarize, use facts, statistics, or data, anything with a number. Now this is also on page 3 if you want any more details in the handout that we have. So anytime you're referring to an idea, using a source as visual, even if it's a photograph or a chart, you still have to cite when you do that as well. Parenthetical citations. Okay. So these appear in your text and give general information about your source. Okay. So give the first and last name of the author if used in a sentence, the first time she or he is mentioned, and then use only the last name therefore after. So for example, the first time I would cite James Joyce, I would say James Joyce, and then the second time I wouldn't have to, I could just say Joyce. Also, it's really informal to use the author's first name, even if you know the author by chance. Never say James, that's really unprofessional.
So parenthetical citations, these are the citations in your text. This is the first form, it's the most common, this is the one you will use the most often, it's the one you should learn the best. Basically what happens is you say, you need an introductory phrase, then you have your quote, and then in parentheses, you have the author's last name and the page number you got it from. Quotation marks are placed before and after the quotation, as we see here. And this is very important. The end punctuation is placed after the final parenthesis. No comma between the author and page number. So, even though this is what you might consider the end of your sentence, the sentence doesn't end until after your citation. So there's nothing here. You have the quotation mark, a space, your first parenthesis, author's last name, just a space, page number, end parenthesis, and then your final punctuation mark, usually a period. This is the second form. The author's last name appears in the sentence with the page number in the parentheses. So Smith declares that, then you have your whole quotation mark, quotes at the beginning and end, and then at the end you just have the page number in parentheses followed by a period, or whatever your end punctuation mark is. And now we're getting into some of the more specific examples. This is on page 4 in your packet. Authors with the same last name. So here we have J. Smith and M. Smith, John Smith and Madeline Smith, whatever. You have to add the first initial of each author's name to differentiate between the two. So according to J. Smith, page number. One item that M. Smith, 154. You have 2 to 3 authors that worked on the same book or article. You have to mention both of them, or all 3. So Smith and Jones say, and then you have your citation, it is believed that, and then Smith, Harris, and Jones all worked on the same book. In this case, you cite it from page 78. 4 or more authors, again, this is getting a little bit more specific. You can do the same thing. You can list all of them. Smith, Johnson, Peters, and Harris, and then you have your page number. Or you can do this thing, you have Smith et al. Is what it's called. You do Smith space, et space, al, period, space, and then a page number. If you have no author listed, then you have to reference it by the title of the article or the book. In this case, Youth in the Age of Romeo and Juliet, or you do a shortened version of the title. Usually the first important word, we leave off words like of and the. Start with the first important word. If you have more than one work by the same author, you must reference the title. For example, if you have 2 works by Jones, you say Jones 75. Whoever's reading your paper won't know if you're talking about one article by Jones or the second article by Jones. So, for example, you have Jones' Feminist Ideals, because Feminist Ideals, 21st Century Perspectives is the title of this article. If you are citing more than one work in the same sentence, or you're saying, for example, that these three people all said the same thing, which was blank. You have to cite all of them. And you do it the same way you normally would. You have the author's last name and the page number, and then you separate them with a semicolon. As it says here, they have to be listed alphabetically. So Harris, Jones, and Smith.
Okay, so parenthetical citations for a website. It's a bit different because sometimes, as we know, websites don't have authors. So if that's the case, you just use the title. So you have to follow the general rules regarding authorship, of course. If the author is not there, just don't list it. Page numbers are not needed. As you know, most websites do not have page numbers. Include the paragraph numbers only if they're used in the source. If they're not labeled, you don't have to use them. So this is kind of an example. This is just the title here. You don't have to cite it because there's no paragraph numbers and it's used in the sentence. Here is what it would look like if there was a paragraph number. It would just be PAR period space the number, PAR standing for paragraph, and that is the author's name if it is there, Smith. If not, again, don't worry about it, just use the title. That would sort of look like, I look at Romeo the man, and then paragraph 4, if Smith wasn't there. Okay. So indirect sources. When you use a quote from another person that appears in the text you are using, this is called an indirect quote. So be sure to mention it in your text in the following way. So basically, if I'm reading an article by Henderson and he quotes Johnson, that's an indirect quote, that's an indirect source. Here's an example. So according to Henderson, Shakespeare is said to have written some of his comedies while in a euphoric state stimulated by the warmth of the sunshine in April. So you would mark this by quoted, standing for QTD in Johnson 55. So that would just signify that you didn't actually get the direct source of what Henderson said, you just took it from Johnson. So Johnson is the author of the text you have in front of you, and on page 55 he is quoted from Henderson. Johnson is the source you list in your works cited page. You do not list Henderson because you did not use his source. You got that information through Johnson. Now, reading this happens sometimes. There's kind of no way to avoid that. Sometimes you can't access the material, but if you can, try to find the original source. It shows a better understanding on your behalf that you understood the original source and you didn't quote someone who quoted somebody. It just seems more credible. So quoting, this is on page 5. So it's used when you repeat an idea word for word. It must be exact. Any 3 words or more together, you have to quote it. That's kind of the rule that I use anyway. And it must be exact. Even if you change one word in it and it's not exact, it's not a correct quote. Just use the original wording. A parenthetical citation is needed for every quote. Doesn't matter, anytime you have a quote, you have to have it in text citation after. A quote must be either introduced or followed up with your own words in the same sentence. It must also be explained in relation to your ideas. It does not do to just throw in a quote. That does not show that you understood what the author was saying. It doesn't show any sort of relevance to your own argument. You have to kind of explain the quote in the same sentence what we preferred. When quoting, it is necessary to either introduce the quote with your own words or follow with your own words in the same sentence. A quotation cannot stand on its own as a separate sentence. So we call this icing. Introduce, cite, and explain. So you have to kind of introduce your quote. This author says this, set the quote up, cite your quote, and explain how it's relevant to your argument to make your paper stronger. Okay, so 4 or fewer typed lines marked by quotation marks. The author's last name and page number included in citation, but not within the quotation marks. So this is an example. This failure to act is addressed by Davis, who asserts that change will happen only when the motivation behind the decision concerns those in charge. 55. Okay. Unfortunately, Davis is right because of the numerous examples of this situation that exist in our society today. Note here that the quote is used, and then the writer's own analysis of the quote is directly after. This is what we mean by explaining the quote. Short quotes are generally preferred to long quotes since they show greater understanding of the source material. When you use a shorter quote, it gives you kind of more room to relate that to what your argument is.
Okay, now we're into long quotes. Long quotes you should have fewer of than short quotes in your essay. In MLA format, a long quote is signified by being 4 or more lines long. It is introduced by a colon. It is in its own block of text, indented 10 spaces from the left margin. This is on page 6, if you want to follow along in your packet. Double spaced, just like the rest of your essay. There are no quotation marks. When you indent it, it acts like the quotation marks. And the parenthetical citation goes after the period. Notice this is the only thing in this entire presentation that is in bold, because it's really, really important. This is when you break the rule that proves all the other rules correct. So here we have the period coming at the very end of the quotation, not after the citation. Here is your introduction to the quote with a colon, just like we said. Everything is tabbed in, it's in its own block of text, double spaced, and again we end it with a period before the citation. This is the only time it happens with a long quote. Summarizing. This is when you take information from a long passage and condense it into your own words. This is on page 7 now. Similar to a book report. The author should be mentioned somewhere in the text. So here we have an example. This is a summary of Romeo and Juliet, which I will not read. You can pause it if you want to. But the general idea is you take a large amount of text and condense it. So Romeo and Juliet is, a couple hundred pages. And here it's down into one paragraph. Paraphrasing. The preferred method for writing about source material. Paraphrase is about the same length as whatever you are paraphrasing. So ideas from the source are used but put in the writer's own words, and this is very important. It is important to use not only alternate wording, but also different sentence structure. And we'll get into that on the next slide. So here, we're going to give you an example. This is your original text. Romeo and Juliet is not only the tale of two young, doomed lovers, it is the story of how youth can be destroyed when the banality of adulthood is imminent. Citation. So here is an example of an incorrect paraphrase. This is not correct. Romeo and Juliet is not only a story of a young pair of tragic lovers, it is the story of the destruction of youth in the face of the monotony of adulthood. This is an incorrect paraphrase because what the author did, or what the essay writer did, is took this quote from the article and went to a thesaurus and changed a couple words. We have two. We have a pair. Doomed, tragic. Youth can be destroyed, destruction of youth, in the face of banality, monotony. It's basically the same thing. This is an example of a correct paraphrase. This is not the only way it could have been done. This is just one way. It is the uninspired lifestyle of being an adult and the destruction of one's childhood innocence that results from its onset that truly characterizes Romeo and Juliet, not simply the story of tragic, unrequited love. Notice, words were changed, but also the sentence was mixed around. It's not in the same direct proportions. The correct paraphrase shows that the writer has changed the words and the structure of the sentence. This also will help your essay because it shows that you really understood the original quote. Here are some more tips for paraphrasing. Read the original passage several times so that you really understand. And more importantly, read what's around it, because some things can be taken out of context. You really need to understand, an area. Put the passage aside and write or type it in your own words. And then check your version against the original for structure and wording. If you can't think of a way to paraphrase it, use the direct quote with quotation marks. That way you're not, hurting yourself and maybe plagiarizing when you didn't mean to.
So this is on page 8 of the handout, and this is referencing poetry. So one line or part of a line, now we're going to just use That Dog of Art by Denise Leverbutt. Notice here, this is just a line from, this isn't a full line, it's just part of a line from the poem, that the citation is directly after. Now the reason for that is because if it was at the bottom here, all of this part of the sentence, which is your analysis of that part of the line of the poem, would seem like it was liverbots, and it's not. So you would want to have it directly after the quotation of the part of the line. Now for 2 to 3 lines, now this is Birches by Robert Frost, you would have it with the author's last name, and instead of the page number, it would be the line numbers. And if it was more than one line, it would be just 25 through 27 or 25 through 26, etc. Now the most important thing, of course, is with poetry there are line breaks and they are significant. So you would have to kind of mimic that here with a slash. And everything has to be exact. All of the capitalization, the punctuation, it has to be exact. You wouldn't, because this is still a full sentence, you wouldn't uncapitalize the who's, it would still be capital. Okay, so this is for 4 more lines of poetry. Now this is Burning the Christmas Tree by William Carlos Williams. It's basically the same as the long quote. You would have everything indented. You would also, the punctuation would be here, and then you would have the author and the line numbers. It's very similar. Again, really important with the line breaks is to have it exactly as it appears on the page. So you would block the poetry off from the rest of the text. It would be double spaced still, and you would indent 1 inch with no quotation marks. Again, you don't need them. It's very similar to a long quote, but it's just for poetry instead. Okay, so referencing drama or film. So with dialogue, this is from a dollhouse. Just like with the long quotation marks, you would also have the semicolon to signify, this is on page 9 if you kind of want to follow along in your handbook. Important here is that it would be similar to as it appears on the page. The name would be in all caps. You would have a period there, and then the dialogue would continue. You would follow the exact same format as it appears on the page, very similar to poetry. So when you're citing it, again, the punctuation would be there, and then it would be the author's last name, the act, the scene, and the lines. So you can't just have the page number. It has to specifically be the act, the scene, and then the lines that these are taken from. So to quote dramatic dialogue, set lines off from the text, indenting 10 spaces. So instead of 1 inch, it would just be 10 spaces. Write the character's name in caps, followed by a period, as is seen here. Additional lines of dialogue are indented another 1/4 inch. So you see how there is kind of a hanging indent. That would be a 1/4 of an inch. So you would want to make sure all of your kind of indents are in the right format. Okay, so your works cited page is on page 10 if you want to follow in your handout. We all kind of know what this is, but it's just a complete list of every source that you reference in your paper. Every single source has to be there. Even if you mention it once and it's only 1 word, it still has to be on the cited page. It provides the information needed for a reader to locate any sources cited in your paper. For example, if your professor is reading it, they're really interested in one quote that you use and they want to look for that article, they can very easily do that with the works cited page. Each source in your paper must appear on the works cited page and vice versa. They have to match. If there's something that's on your works cited page, it has to be quoted in your essay. If not, it should be removed from your works cited page.
So here is an example of a sample works cited page. So here it is, and we have some guidelines here on this side. They should be in alphabetical order by the author's last name. If you do not have an author, it should then be cited by the first word in the title, the first important word. You have a hanging indent, meaning that the first line is all the way to the left margin, and any subsequent lines within the same citation are tabbed in once. Double spaced, and the header continues to appear on each page. Notice here we have the essay writer's last name and the page number. Continuing on, general information to include is the author's last name, the title of the work, the publication information, and the medium, usually print or web, sometimes DVD, etc. Capitalize all important words. Notice here we have to be loved, Amy Denver, and then and is not an important word, so that's not capitalized. Italicize longer titles, use quotation marks around shorter titles. just like we said at the beginning. So here are some basic information for sources. This is on page 11. So this is a book. This is the one you'll probably use most often. You have the author's last name, then their first name. The title of the work is in italics. You have the location of the publisher's name, the year, and the medium. Like I said, the medium can be print, web, CD, DVD, etc. In this case, it's a book, so it's probably print. And here we have an example. We have Morris and Tony. The title of the book is The Bluest Eye, printed in New York by Plume in '94, and we have a print copy. All right, here's an online book. You have the author's last name, then their first name. You have the title of the book in italics, the place of publication, followed by a colon, publisher, year of publication, just like the book was. But then you have the title of the website or database in italics. You then have the medium, the day, month, and year of access. That's the day that you went there and found it. That way, if, say, the website is updated between when you found it and when it was or when you handed the assignment in or when it was published, whoever's reading your paper knows that you are going from the version, or from, for example, the May 18th, 2009 version. So like we said, we have author's last name, first name, title of the work in italics, printed it in Hertfordshire, England, by London Press in '97. You found it via Google Book Search on the web, and then you have the day of access. So now we're working with a work in an anthology or collection. This is on page 12. You have the author's last name and first name, the title of the essay or the chapter, then the title of the anthology is in italics, the title of the essay or chapter is in quotation marks. Then you have the editors, the place of publication, colon, publisher, the year it was published, the pages that you're drawing from, and the media of publication. So here we have, you're taking Rhetorical Pedagogy by William Covino. So you have Covino William. Title of the essay or chapter. It was printed in A Guide to Composition Pedagogies. Your editors are, notice how you have eds dot. And in this case, the editors' names are first name, last name, as it appears in the book. So in this case, Tate comes before Rupiper, comes before Schick, because that's the way it was printed. Then you have the publication information, the date. These are the pages that you're citing, and the medium. All right, this is an article in a scholarly journal. You have the author's last name, first name, title of the article in quotes, the title of the periodical in italics. This is on page 13, by the way. You have the volume and the issue number with a period in between. The year of publication in parentheses, followed by a colon, the pages, and then the medium. This is all very complicated, and the reason that we're going over it and we're doing these videos is because it is really complicated. No one's going to memorize all this stuff, so if you need to pause and use this as an example, please do so. So you have the author's last name, first name, you have the title of the article in quotation marks, the title of the periodical starting here in italics, the volume and issue number, so volume 6, issue 1, year of publication is 2006, these are the pages, and this is the medium.
So this is on page 14 if you're following along. This is just articles retrieved from a library subscription service, so like JSTOR or something. It would be very similar to the other forms. You would have the last name, the first name, the title of the article, the title of the journal, of course in italics, the title of the article is in quotation marks, the volume, the issue number, broken by a period. Now in parentheses you would have the publication date, semicolon, the page number range. If you only use one page, just put the one page. If not, use the whole range. The database name, like JSTOR for example, the medium, if you printed it, or if it was online, and the date of access. Again, this is really important because that could change from when you read it, so you'd want to know, you'd want to have that cited correctly. This is an example. Again, this is kind of the author, the journal number, or the journal name. That would be the volume, the issue. There's the date there, and that's the page range. And when it's accessed, that's the name of it. Use the abbreviation N. For page, for no page numbers, if there isn't any page number. So it would kind of look like that. If there isn't any page number, you would do that. Now the URL is no longer needed, and that's because there's just, the internet has developed so rapidly that there's so many different ways to access one thing, so the URL is just kind of is irrelevant, so you don't actually have to have the URL anymore. So on page 15, an article or section from a website. So it's very similar to the one previous. It's last name, first name of author, title of the section, title of the overall web page, edition, and then the publisher or the sponsoring organization, the date of the publication or posting, and then the date you received it as well. So both of those dates need to be on there. And this is sort of what it would look like. You can see here that Purdue University is there as a sponsor, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, like with websites, some of this information isn't there, and if it's not there, you can't include it, unfortunately. So just be aware of that. Like, for example, publisher or sponsor organization mightn't be available on the source that you have, so you might have to exclude that information. Okay. So this is now on page 19. So it's sources with more than 2 authors. So you can see here Stubbs Marcia, as you usually would if it was only one author, but then following that, you don't have to do last name, comma, first name, and be, kind of impossible. So you see here, just say William Kane. So that's kind of how that would look like there, and it would be alphabetical, of course. Now, sources without an author, you would, like we said before, you would just go from the next available thing, so it would just be the title of the article. Now, 2 or more works by the same author. Excuse me. Yeah, so you would just have the author's name as it would be. So, for example, Toni Morrison, comma Toni, and then Beloved. And now it would be alphabetically, it would just be Morrison, Toni, and then the next title. So if it was, for example, Blue Eyes, Beloved would go before that and your works cited, because it would be alphabetical by the second title. Okay. So this is still on page 19. So for additional help with MLA, you can always come to the Writing Center. If you just want to make sure you cited everything correct, we can sit down with you and we can kind of go over it with you. That is our number to call to make an appointment. It is 518-454-5299. It's actually just as easy to just stop by St. Joseph Hall and make an appointment that way as well. We are on the 2nd floor of St. Joseph's Hall. It's the Academic Support Center. Now you can always go to the Neil Hellman Library Reference Desk. Their number is there as well, 518-454-5181. The Purdue University Online Writing Lab, OWL, is also a fantastic website. Now, we, of course, have our own website with all of this information on it as well, which is just as good of a source. So all of those sources are available. If you ever want to question anything, or you ever question anything and you want to check it, there's also tons of MLA handbooks. Some of them are available online. You can always use those as a reference as well. Of course, we also have handouts, and they're always good to have it with you when you're citing, so you do have some sort of reference if you are ever unsure. And so these are our resources, of course, and thank you for watching.